talk I gave before, but I kind of like skimmed it as much as possible because the other talk like took an hour and a half, and I don't want to do that to you guys. But I start with something. I'll start with a question, like, what do you usually, like as a front-end developers, do when you hit a wall, feel bored, or, you know, like have an idea that you want to implement? No idea. Harry, do you not have something?
What we do?
Check out a talk on your JavaScript framework?
No.
Or,
You create your own framework.
All language.
So I'm here announcing framework grainer grass, which is like is always how it is on the other side. Huh? Yeah, but Harry has been waiting for it for a really long time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so about me. I'm actually an analytic engineer. I have 20 years developing not only web applications, a lot of stuff. Currently, I'm working as a database developer at the IEMC, and I just accepted actually a new job, so I'm probably going to move to it. I love to learn things and then rant about them, and I believe that there is different solution for a problem. If I solve something with a hammer, I kind of like try again with a spoon and see whether if a spoon will do it or not. I'm not here to teach you about coding or anything. I'm here just to to share with you my experience with multiple frameworks I tried for different projects. And actually, I'm going to mention some of the stuff that some of the frameworks that I haven't even used, just to be fair for everybody. Because maybe your favorite framework is one of them, and I mention it, and then I get a lot of. Is this going to be on YouTube?
Oh yeah,
I'm getting a lot of bad comments. Huh?
Okay.
Yeah, but before we begin, the most important element of every presentation, a cat. While you're enjoying this cuteness, so again, this is not to learn code. I'm sorry if in any way I mentioned something about your favorite framework, because I don't have full experience in all of them. If I mention something that is not right, please come and correct me, or correct me during. I mean, I would not really recommend interrupting me during presentation. You don't want to see me in that state, but like after the presentation, probably. This is basically a brief look at what the market offers in 2019. Frameworks, I'm mentioning that not all of them are frameworks, some of them are libraries, just to please React people. React people don't believe that it's a framework. Things we're going to look at are what is the direction, learning curve, simplicity, performance, portability, stability, native support, which companies are backing them, and popularity. Because if I learned anything while we're using a lot of frameworks, is that if you don't have a popular framework, then when you are in a mess, you're alone. So yeah, not a nice experience. So what do we usually need from a framework? We basically, it makes our life easier, it encapsulates our component, provides some state management, and also portability between browsers, because you don't want to write something and then you don't find that, you find that it doesn't work on IE, which is kind of gonna not be the case, because now IE is moving to Chromium, right? Right? No? Yeah? I think so, yeah. So back on track, let's discuss the usual suspects. If I'm talking so fast, please tell me so that I will slow down. But I want to cover as much as possible and get you guys to enjoy the pizza. So the first one is Angular. That's it, let's move on, right? Everybody knows Angular. Well, I mean, I have to mention something about it, right? So, what is the direction of Angular? You know, like it has everything included. You have the state management, routing, HTTP, and they're all compatible with each other. So you don't really need to bring libraries from outside world and try to, you know, glue them together and make them react. It do direct DOM rendering, although this could be, this I think has changed or is going to change in the future because they have a new rendering engine, Ivy, if you heard of it. So who knows, how many people know here what is a virtual DOM is? Okay, a lot of people. Okay, for those who don't know a virtual DOM, what a virtual DOM is, it's basically, when you have a view on your browser, all the components of the browser, all the elements in the browser are basically part of the document object model, basically. And the way that the frameworks do it is that they create a virtual one of it, and then they update that virtual one, and then they create they basically move that virtual DOM into the actual browser DOM. And the reason they do that is because updating the actual DOM is expensive. It basically takes a lot of time because you remove component from the view, and you have to calculate visibility and all of this stuff. While in the virtual DOM, you just it's a tree, and then you can basically just change that. So Angular actually update directly on the browser. I think it uses a DOM, a virtual DOM, but in a completely different way than the other ones use it. And the Ivy new one is actually probably using that. It supports one-way binding and two-way binding. And who doesn't know what one-way binding and two-way binding is? Okay, so if you have an input, a text field on your browser, and you have a property basically on your code that basically feeds that input some data. If you basically if you update the property and it automatically updates the input, okay, that's one way. If you update the input and it updates the property, that's two way. So some of the framework choose to go just one way. So if you have input, if you have an input that you type something in the input, the one way is that it triggers an event, and that event basically goes in and change the property. It doesn't do it automatically. Learning curve is steep. There's a lot to learn actually when you learn Angular, but most of the people that learn Angular say that it's worth it. But there's a lot of materials. It's not simple. It's a full framework. It has everything that you need in it in one package. Uses HTML and directives. Uses TypeScript for those who love TypeScript. How many people love TypeScript? One, two people? Yeah, kind of, yeah. Yeah. Well, I kind of loved it and then hated it and then loved it again, so I can know why I loved it. So, performance, to be fair to Angular, they are rewriting Angular right now. Like they're rewriting Angular rendering engine. There's this Ivy thing that I talked about. There has been a new release for Angular. Everybody say that the new Angular is going to be much more faster, a smaller bundler size, and all of this stuff. I don't know. I haven't touched Angular for years, so this is basically I'm conveying ideas that I basically read on the internet and discuss with other people. Portability, scalability, and stability. Well, it's stable. It's scalable. It's obviously a lot of people, a lot of big applications use Angular. Huh? There's a lot of issues you find on the internet about Angular, but it seems that they all talking about older versions of Angular. If you're a big business and use Angular, you're on the safe side, because really Google is backing it, and there's tons of materials on it, ton of people who knows how to use it, and it's not going to go anywhere. Really. It doesn't have a native support. By native support, I mean when you write your web application, you cannot compile it to a mobile application, but you can take your code and kind of wrap it in some mobile framework like Ionic, Electron, and native script. And then, Electron is, I don't know if Electron now supports mobile or not, but native scripts and Ionic can actually take an Angular web application and make it a mobile application. but I guess there's a lot of, I mean, on the UI part, I guess there's a lot of modification needs to be done, unless you use material design or something like that. So again, supported by Google, it has a big community, detailed documentation, and then there is also Angular Dart. So Angular is not only TypeScript, but also the Dart language. If you ever, who knows Dart language? Nobody used Dart. Okay. So Dart language is another Google language. They created it. They're using it with Flutter to build mobile applications, and it seems that there's a project also to support it. To provide Angular in Dart flavor. Very simple example. Again, this is not about learning code. Like how it looks like. Well, it looks like this. You basically have some Angular libraries. You import some stuff. You declare your component. So which selector, what part of the HTML is going to be where the application will be rendered. The file, the template URL is the URL for your HTML file. The styler is it's the CSS link, the CSS file. This is your component, it's TypeScript component, very simple constructor on select, something like that. And then you have also an HTML that basically represents your view. And you can see the directives over there, like ng4 is a loop. So if you have like multiple items, like an array, it will loop over it and it will render things. It will add events by brackets click, and you can have also classes, but dynamic classes and stuff like that. Angular projects tend to grow big, as much as I heard, because I never really worked in a very big Angular project. But I mentioned it because it's number one to mention. Now, React. I love the logo. That's something I can say about React. It does not identify itself as a framework. It identifies itself as a library. Harry, correct me. You're like the React guy. No, it still does that.
Yes, no, just a library.
They do that. Okay, great. So their direction. Well, they use Virtual DOM. Again, the Virtual DOM is the memory representation of your UI, which is a big tree. And then they use something called reconciliation, which means that the Virtual DOM basically only updates. Okay, so let's say you have a view, and then that view basically represents some properties, and these properties change. What the Virtual DOM and React do to speed up the process of rendering is it checks which part of the tree has changed, and it only updates that part. It doesn't update the whole tree. Okay, and which was not the case before. Like in the earlier versions of React, I think it was updating the whole thing. So React was kind of like, I mean, it was fast, but still, like with reconciliation, it became like really fast. Again, depending on who you talk to. It supports one-way binding, but then with hooks, I think now you have a little bit of a different setup.
Well, you'd still be attaching event handlers to the
one-way binding.
Yeah.
React. You update the property, it updates the view. You can't do the other way around. So if you update the view, you have to trigger that the view has changed, and then handle it in a function. It does not do that magically for you. It's a simple library actually. It's actually a very enjoyable library to write your applications with. I have to say that the code is well structured and clean, maybe. Because if you want to use React, you're going to use JSX. I'm going to explain what JSX is. It's yeah, I mean, there's no words. Which annihilate that clean code structure. But I have to say that when you look at the React code, and I wrote applications in React, they tend to have a clean structure. You can identify what is what and how they interact with each other. Performance, it depends, but it's fast as you said. has always positive reviews and is very responsive. Well, it's been there since 2013, but tested. There's a lot of people are using it. Actually, the other day I found out that USB e-banking is built on React. And the reason I found this is because I'm taking another course on React, and I have the React browser extension. And then when I went to the USB e-banking, it actually said, oh, that's a React application, and you can actually spy on the properties and stuff over there, which is weird because that should not be active unless you have a flag that says this is production or development. So let's see how that goes for e-banking. It has native support. That means you can. There is a version of React that you can actually build mobile applications with. But then you can also take your web application React and put it into a native script, Ionic or Electron, and you have also like a mobile application which share the same code as the web application. The native, the React native is actually, I would call it like a different framework because it uses different tags, different everything. It's not the same way. You don't use HTML there. You structure things like HTML, but it's not HTML. Support and backup, it's supported by Facebook. It has big community, detailed documentation, big ecosystem. Actually, there's almost nothing out there you cannot find for React, like anything. Like you can think of any JavaScript library, visualization, whatever you want, you'll find it for React. And I have to say that it's easier to find if your project has some capacity problem, like you want to bring in more developers. Now it's really easy to bring React developers in, like, and they will be productive. So yeah. Now, regarding that clean code and JSX, how does it look like? Well, first of all, it uses one of the things that I like. It uses actually the ES6 class format. So you have like constructors, you have your functions, and then you have a render function which basically renders your view. But if you look here, you'll see that there is JavaScript inside HTML, inside JavaScript, inside HTML, inside JavaScript. And I don't know if you think this is okay or not, but if you think this is okay, then yeah, good luck. Especially you, HA. You know that. So, view. This is my favorite actually out of them all. I use it on a daily basis. This is actually, I think it's the, okay, this is my opinion. I think it's the best out of the three, based on personal experience. But why I say where's my data? Because if you look at the direction, the third point, magical two-way binding framework, it actually has that two-way binding and it has so many details. It's like sometimes it's so easy to just like have an object and you have some UI representation and you just like say, hey, this is the view and this is the update and this is the view model and all of this stuff, and it will do all the magic links for that. And you can even have watchers, and you can have computed properties, updated computer properties, and stuff like that. I don't want to get you confused about all of this stuff, but it gives you like full data manipulation and data monitoring and all of this stuff inside in one object. Like you can basically import some object and then and then reconfigure it in the watchers and all of this stuff, and then just like feed the UI. It uses Virtual DOM. It's based on what Vue website claimed. Their Virtual DOM is also even faster than React one. They do like a benchmark there, but I mean, who cares now? Everything is fast, I think, enough. Battery attached not included. By that I mean, if you download the view itself, it does not have a router, it does not have an HTTP library, it does not have a lot of stuff that, for example, Angular has. But the same core group that actually maintains Vue, they also provide their own libraries for state management, for everything else. By the way, state management, component state management is in Vue. Application state management is a different library that is also supported by the core developers, which is called the Vuex. And you can import that. It's the standard supported one. It's very easy to learn. It is very easy to start a project with. You can, in a couple of days, in my experience, achieve what you will do in React or Angular in weeks. It's becoming really very popular. It actually has more likes, if you see there, 105K stars, more likes than React and Angular and all of this stuff right now. Again, very simple, very easy to learn. There's a lot of materials right now for it out there. There's a lot of libraries. It's becoming like React. Anything that you want, you can find a library that you support it. It uses, can be used directly as a JavaScript library. So basically, you do not really need to. You can create a project and you can have Webpack compiler projects and everything, but you can also just like have an HTML page where you put a link for Vue, and then you can just like write JavaScript and it will work. So you don't have to have like a big project. You can use it as like a jQuery alternative if you want to use it. The downside of it is, and that based on my experience, is that components can become a little bit bulky because they include everything, and because they give you a lot of tweaking, and especially in the state management, you'll find yourself like having a lot of life cycle methods and a lot of like data manipulation and a lot of methods and other stuff. So you may end up with, and because also the view, the way that views are built is that in a file called view where you have your HTML and you have your JavaScript and CSS. So if you decide to include everything there, you will end up with a big file. So it depends on like how you want to maintain it. Performance is very fast. It's also very, very, responsive. It has a very small download size. It's backup tested since 2014. It works very well for a lot of people. There's no native support. Actually, that's not true. There are some people who are actually trying to create a Vue native. But then you still can use it with native script and Ionic. It has big community and a lot of detailed documentation, just like the others. How it looks like this. So this is the same thing this is exactly the same thing from React. And you can see, like you have your HTML, which is just an HTML with like some directives, but it's HTML. So you can give this to your designer, and then your developers, like your JavaScript developer and your designer can actually like work on parallel, if you want to call it that, if you can arrange that. And then you have like this data. This is where the script, right? This is all what your JavaScript is there. Is like you can have a data which returns a message, input and tick, and then you have an add there, like an add method. This is the method this is the event that you trigger when you click on the button over there. Now, because it's doing a lot of magical data binding through JavaScript proxies and stuff like that, once you push something here, like once you type something in the input and you click, once you type something in the input, it automatically updates the input in the data. Once you click the add, it basically pushes an element now in the array, and once the tick array has been updated, it updates automatically the view. Some people like this, some people don't. It depends. So that's all for the three, kind of like the most talked about on the internet. Now the alternatives for the alternatives. One of my favorites, actually, and I use it to build some dashboards and stuff like that. It's called Mithril. This is a very simple, just JavaScript. No HTML, no fancy stuff. The whole library is 8K in size. It's used by companies like Vimeo and Nike. So Vimeo is actually based on Mithril. You can see here, for example, some comparison from their website. So you can see that the difference in download size and the difference in performance. Just because it's JavaScript, it actually it's very fast because you're actually writing your views in JavaScript. Based on my personal experience, I find this very pleasant to work with. In the beginning, you need a little bit to break your habits, but then after that, I find it really very, very enjoyable to work with because it's just JavaScript. And you can actually easily integrate this into your server applications because you just see out JavaScript. Okay. It provides only one-way binding. So basically, your data model pushes data to your view. But if you want to do the other way around, you have to trigger events. It has an easy learning curve because it has like probably a couple of methods. It's not really very complicated. It's very simple. It includes its router and XFL models. It's pure JavaScript, as I said, and it uses like directly JavaScript, so you don't need any build process or any polyfill. And because of that, it's really easy to maintain projects in Mithril because if you have anything, you just like open the file and just like write your code, and you're done. You don't have to build. Okay, maybe you have to test and do stuff like that, but you don't have to like compile and whatever, unless if you're using TypeScript or something else. Performance, again, it's on the light side, as mentioned before. They have now version 2 is stable for a while, and there's 11,000 likes, stars and it's very active. Actually, I checked it today. And the last update was 3 days ago, so it's still active. Again, no native support, but you can use it with the other native script, Iconic, and all of this stuff. And it's backed again by Vimeo and Nike, and it has like 784. So it's a very active project. How it looks? Well, this is the same again application. This is how it looks. You can see it's just JavaScript. For normal JavaScript properties, like variables, there's nothing special about them. Your application has a view method over here, and then that view method returns an array, and that array is basically your UI elements. So every time you see M, which is the core function of Mithril, it takes a tag. It takes a tag and it takes some variable parameters to do something with that tag. So for example, the first one is H3 message. It will create an H3 and then it will basically fill it with the message hello Mithril. And then you have here, for example, a map to create an ordered list. You have an input. You can see here, for example, if you update something here, it will update the view, but then if you type something in the input, you have on input, and then you have to do an event that updates your model, data model. Eventually, after you write your application, you just like, as everything else, you have to mount your application for it. The next one, I used this before I used Mithril. I also enjoyed it. It's really a nice one. It's called Riot. Now, it's mostly about writing components, kind of like React. I used it several years ago, actually, to be quite honest with you, like 3 years ago or something like that. It was also very enjoyable to use. Mithril and Riot, I would use, if I have a simple thing that I want to do, and I don't really require like whatever that other frameworks require. If I want to just like create a page, for example, with some visualizations and a dashboard, which is actually I've used them for dashboards. This is as simple as just like including a library and then just like write some HTML and then or JavaScript and then include it there. Riot uses one-way binding. It has a compiler application, so it has its own compiler that you can just like use command line to generate everything. It's easy to learn, very simple. I mean, have a look at it. I haven't used it for a while. I mean, Mithril, I used it like probably a couple of months ago, but like Riot, I haven't used it for years. But when I used it, it was really useful. It was really simple, and this thing about the Vimeo and Mac there is actually a typo. I copy pasted probably the thing. So it's not Mithril and Riot are supported by these companies. Only Mithril. I don't know about Riot. This is how it looks. You have just one file, and then you have your HTML as HTML, okay, with some directives, like for example each, right? And then you have your scripts, which is just like a normal JavaScript, and you have some events. So it's also very simple and very direct, and you really don't need that much. It also uses Virtual DOM. All of the mentioned before frameworks use virtual DOMs. That means when you create your view, you will have part of your memory reserved like as a mirror of your view that gets manipulated, and that adds load that basically consumes memory and add load on the garbage collector, because the garbage collector have to clean all the other stuff, right? But one framework, which is kind of like new, if you want to call it, decided not to do that. It's called Svelte. And it says that it's a magical disappearing UI framework. No, Svelte, don't do that to us.
It disappeared.
Exactly, the magically disappearing framework. That's true. You see? Trying to prove that in every way. Yeah, correct. Svelte is actually, I got introduced to Svelte on its version 2. They rewrote the framework to version 3, and they changed a lot. So I'm out of sync a little bit. I went through the tutorials of Svelte 3, and I never really used Svelte yet in any real project. It's just been experimenting and doing stuff like that. But it's a very nice framework to have a look, to have your eye on. So what Svelte does is it says, why do we have a virtual room, virtual DOM? Why do we do whatever we're doing? We can actually do everything in JavaScript. So you write your HTML, you write your JavaScript, you write your bindings, and then we compile that by surgically inject the proper JavaScript in the final compiled version of your application. Instead of creating like a virtual DOM and all of this stuff, if a property change, I know I know that this property needs to change the input, so I'll just like write the JavaScript for you to actually directly update the input. If the input change, I write directly. I will generate the functions for you, the events and everything, to do this kind of binding. So it does not define itself as actually framework in that sense. It's actually just that it defines itself as a compiler. Again, no virtual DOM, two-way binding. It's very easy to learn. It used to use HTML file, but with the version 3, they changed to .svelte file. It's super fast and rock solid. Now, why is it super fast? Because there was an example of how people used Svelte to overcome performance problems that they encountered with React. And I'm not mentioning React here because I want to like say something bad about React. It just actually, this is the case. Some people in Brazil, they actually made some application that works on like a mobile kind of like payment machine or something like that. And then they had it in React, and because React used virtual DOM and everything, the interface was kind of like sluggish and was not, because this is like a very small device, like an embedded thing or whatever. And then they switched to Svelte, and because Svelte uses directly JavaScript without overloading the device with the virtual DOM, it basically just like the performance was like really higher. Svelte 3 was released this year, so how stable it is or not, I still cannot find, like, as I cannot say like React and Vue or Angular that you have all of this like resources out there and all of these styles and components. It's still it's getting there. The creator of that, the main author of it, somebody called Richard Harris, he works in New York Times, and he also created an alternative for Webpack called Rollup.js, if you know about it. He has some wonderful talks on YouTube. I would really encourage to actually watch them. And he talks about reactivity, and he compares, for example, Svelte and React, and show with example like how much performance you gain by using Svelte over React. This is how it looks. So again, you have your script over there. So you can see your properties are normal JavaScript properties. Your functions are normal functions. There's nothing really fancy about it. There's only one thing that they mention in the documentation that you have to take off. Your your HTML is normal normal HTML, but they do have their own tags, like for example, each. And they also have their own directives to do some data binding and event handling and all of this stuff. By now we're not running out of time or not, I don't know. But whatever I'm going to mention after that is basically, I'm just mentioning it because I don't want to hurt some other people's feelings or something like that. So I'm just like probably going to mention some of the frameworks that some people like. I never really tried web components, but you can also use web components. Who used web components here? How do you like web components? Okay, don't use it. Yeah, well, because I get always the Yeah, so, I never really use it Ember.js, but I heard that it's very popular with Ruby people, so I don't know how.
I did some Ember quite some time ago, so I think that's changed a lot since then.
Okay.
And
yeah, I really cannot say anything about it. I'm just mentioning it here because you may I mean, if you're a Ruby person, you may want to have a look at Ember.js because it seems to have like Ruby people really like it. Never really, I don't know, but it seems to be kind of like an Angular-like framework that you may want to also try. And there's a lot of them out there. It's really a lot of them out there. But I would really, I mean, if you're more interested about like finding out all about the frameworks out there, their performance, their sizes and everything, there's this URL. This is like benchmark and stuff. I mean, benchmark is not important, but then maybe you want to know like the performance penalties of using different frameworks or the size and everything. This is a link. I can share with you guys the presentation later, and you can have that link, and you can have a look at them. And then there they list a lot of frameworks. You can also have a look at them. I've been using Flutter for a while with Dart language. Kind of like them a little bit, I have to say. And then sometime Google announced that. So Flutter is basically to build mobile applications, and it uses Dart, and it uses whatever, something. Like it has its own structure, so it has its own style in a way. But they announced last year that your Flutter application, you will be able to compile it into a web application, and you can use it like as a something with a project called Hummingbird. I haven't followed this, like I really didn't follow it like in the last time I looked at it, probably like it was in February or something like that. So if you're interested in writing something that is mobile and you want this to live also on the web, and you don't like React, not because React is bad, but because, you know, different people like different stuff, you probably want to check Hummingbird. Again, it's a Google thing. It uses Dart. I do like this language. It's nice. It's very nice. It supports all Flutter. So whatever you write in Flutter and then you have it as a mobile application, you will have it also, like you can compile it to a public version of it. But they are building it like, as much as I know, they're building it like independent of Flutter, so it's going to be like two different things. But then you will have a common code base between your Android, iOS, and web. So I guess this is good. So that's all for now. Let's talk. I hope I didn't talk so fast. I hope I didn't. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot to cover, and I wish I can cover it. But I wanted also to make it really light and then make you guys enjoy the pizza. If anything, who uses Vue here? No one uses Vue. I would try Vue if you guys looking at something that is really like you can depend on and it's alternative to Angular and React. I would try Vue. Vue is currently they're rewriting the framework in TypeScript, and they're going to make it TypeScript compatible, and they're changing things to make it not less magical, but easier to organize, if I may say, like a cleaner code. Not that it's not clean code, but again, if you remember, I mentioned that if you have a big component, it gets big. It really gets big. And if you are into the market for something that is really simple, direct, and fast, and will give you peace of mind, try Mithral. I really love this one. It's just like it's so easy to maintain the code. You just like you write JavaScript, and then when you go back to it and you read it as JavaScript. There's like, and you can actually generate that by server-side code. So it's like direct and simple. So yeah, that's all. please enjoy the
Questions? No, maybe
Oh,
some
questions.
Yeah.
questions.
Do you think, so the thing that is always said about Svelte first is the fact that it's precompiled to vanilla JavaScript. Is this kind of innovation something that interests the other big framework, and they might just implement it as well?
At least in my readings, I did not see that. Nobody is going to leave the virtual DOM. The whole idea of Svelte is that they don't want a virtual DOM. They want to, okay, so what Svelte does, you can do it as a human being. You can just like say, I have a property, I can just like, whenever it updates, I can create there's JavaScript proxy, whatever, you can actually just like say, oh, this has been updated, I'll trigger this event, and then I'm gonna go and update the event. So they're trying to take that out of your shoulder and write it themselves, like as a compiler, right? But then React and other React, Angular, I'm sure that Angular, I read about Angular AV today, and I'm sure that they're not doing that. Vue is definitely not doing that. I don't know who's doing, like even Riot, it has its own compiler, but then it still uses virtual DOM. So the difference is that they're trying to write much more detailed JavaScript that basically tells which one is.
So maybe it's because I'm not a JavaScript developer,
Okay.
so it might be stupid. But from what I remember from React, one of the things they were saying about virtual DOM is it's too expensive to always update the DOM, so you want to update virtual DOM and then do a diff and just update.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how, if they don't have the virtual DOM, even if they are using vanilla JavaScript, why is Svelte fast? I guess it would still face the
Because you don't have the overhead of the virtual DOM. Because if you update your data model, you will have to populate that update into your component tree, right? And then, I mean, I don't claim that I know the internals exactly, but you have to check which component got affected by that change. And they have like some ID for each component, which links, I think, to an ID on the actual view. And then once they finish these updates, they basically take only those components that have been updated and re-render them on that. So with Svelte, you don't do this. Okay, with Svelte, you update the property, it triggers an event, it updates the view directly. It does not go and check which component. It does not go like and traverse the tree of the virtual DOM and just like find out which one has changed. It's just like, hey, you changed. Okay, then you depend on that. I'm gonna update your value, and that's it. Does that make sense?
I think I just like the understanding of what was the virtual DOM solving in the first place then. Like why doesn't React do that?
Why doesn't React do that? Because okay. I guess things came like gradually. It's not like it's hey, we have this view and we decide we have these solutions and we decide which one we pick. I think things came gradually, and even React, for example, when they started with the virtual DOM, what they used to do is that they would recreate the whole virtual DOM every time there's a change, and then copy that to the view. Okay, and then they did the reconciliation thing, which I described, which is only updating that component that has changed. And then they build the whole framework over that. So if they decide, for example, to go to a solution like Svelte, I'm guessing they have to rewrite a lot of their framework, right? That's one thing. And then not only that, because people are used now to the way that React works, so they know what they expect out of the virtual DOM process, okay? If you do that change, you have to go through a lot of work. I kind of follow both the creator of React and the creator of Svelte on Twitter, and I noticed that they actually kind of like have a communication about this. But I cannot say like on engineering level, like on writing the framework level. I did not go that deep. But I'm more like a user. I'm an application developer on top of these frameworks, so I don't know exactly the internals, except the part that which one will perform better and what philosophy they're using, like to update the stuff. And, yeah. So.
Is it perhaps because of this type of framework depends on what kind of set, what kind of app they address? If you have an app that is clean, that is minimalist, or an app that is very with low features or 1 and 2 features per page or something like that, would that probably fit better for framework like Metric? And bigger apps or apps with a lot of interactions or lots of things to manage with the user would be better for React or bigger framework like React or Angular.
Well, I think it eventually comes back to like how capable you are on the tool that you have, right? So if you tell me today to start a new application, probably the first thing I will do is that I'm going to go and create it with Vue, because I've been using Vue like on daily basis, for example, for the past 2 years. So, but then, with Mithril, for example, would I use Mithril? Well, I'm not as capable on Mithril as I am. Like I know how to deal with obstacles that I get with Vue, for example. So it's the same thing with you. I don't know which framework you're using. React. Okay. So you're basically much more like you know when something happens, why it happened, because you are familiar with the tool, right? But sometimes you wish for more or for less, like Mithril, right? Like you don't want to create a project and compile. So when I will use something like Mithril, the small one, if I find myself, I don't want to use big tools and compile and do all of this stuff. I just want something like a jQuery replacement, but with more capabilities. And I just want to include it in my HTML. And this is what I did with my dashboard, right? I just like have the Mithril as like a dependency, script tag, right? And then I just like wrote JavaScript files, and works like charm. And the nice thing about it is, anytime somebody wants to change something in the dashboard, I just go open that JavaScript file and change it, and I don't have to recompile or rebuild or do anything. Okay. But then, does that work for a really big project? I don't think so, because there's a lot more needs to be done. So I hope that answers a little bit of this. More questions? The last chance? No?
Thank you very much.